Everybody for tuning in to Coder Conversations. If you want to catch up on any previous episode, visit us at www.codercombos.com. Your host, Kevin.
And I'm Brian Russick, professional drummer, drum teacher based out of the Suffolk County, Long Island, New York area. I could be found on the web at brianrussick.com.
And for today's guest, we have Lisa Kirchner, recording artist and Broadway actress, and much more. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm really happy to be here. Brian, I told Kevin I really enjoyed the videos. I went through a whole bunch of them.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I'm going to go back.
Awesome. Which
Yeah.
what was your favorite?
Well, I started at the top. I didn't have a favorite because each person had a different kind of philosophy or thing to talk about. The ones I remember a lot are the animator who talked about the opportunities that he got and how he would shape his career each time, and the filmmaker from I should have made, I didn't take notes, but
that's okay.
the CNN writer. If you look at your layout, you'll know that I went from top to. I didn't go to each one necessarily, but I traveled downward from the top.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah, there's like so many different unique stories, and yours seems really unique as well. Like you've done a lot. So if you don't mind, can you give us your background?
Yes, and I have to put my glasses on for it because I was telling Kevin I'll get lost otherwise. So I'm just going to do a quick timeline. So I was born in Los Angeles. When I was born, we moved to Berkeley. My dad was a composer, a major figure in classical music, and he was also teaching at universities. So we started out in Los Angeles, and then we moved to Berkeley. So each place is another university. But during all that time, and I was always dancing and later singing, and I'll let you know how that goes. But we lived in Rome, we lived in Buffalo, we lived in New York, and also he was at festivals. So we were at the Tanglewood Festival on our way to Boston. He got a call from Harvard asking him to come teach there. So we moved to Cambridge, Massachusetts.
Wow.
Big change.
Crazy.
I had never been in a snowstorm. And I didn't want anyone to see how excited I was when we were on the soccer field. I thought it was so uncool, but I couldn't believe these snowflakes coming down. And then, so in Cambridge, Massachusetts, we lived in Harvard Square, which is right near the campus where the music department was. And I danced, I learned the guitar. I made a record when I was 12. And we had this amazing life I'd love to tell you more about because of my father's colleagues. I mean, just extraordinary people that I met in my living room.
Wow.
But they were friends. It wasn't like some, page 6 thing, and his students would come to the house. They were like our brothers and sisters.
Yeah.
And they that was a marvelous scene in a different era. And I also passed through Indian Hill, which is where I met James Waring, and I was dancing, and I danced with him in a company. Then I went to Commonwealth High, which was founded by Charles Merrill, who was the son of Charles Merrill, Lynch, Fenner, Smith, and Pierce. He was a wonderful man, terribly handsome, had a huge crush on him. And he taught history. He also he wrote books. He was very involved with the Eastern countries, and not like today. This was all in the world where World War I had happened, and we were not we were not promoting fascism. We were promoting democracy. And and I have his book. Then let's see. So Commonwealth, also dancing and singing, and very interesting people there. And it was in the beautiful part of Boston, Back Bay area. And from there, I went to Sarah Lawrence, and that's where I really got into acting and musical comedy. And from there, I went to Lenox Art Center, and then it's lots of shows. Lenox Art Center was a wonderful villa that a count had built for his daughter, an Italian count, and everyone would pass through there, and we did our shows there. I think I did 2 or 3 seasons, but some wonderful plays. I'll tell you more about them. I thought I would just do my travel log. It's very related to my singing, which goes, it's surreally, apparently, goes from one geographical location to another. And it's I just don't want to get lost too long if it's not, because you can then we can talk about the things that you'd like to talk about, and that I think are interesting just from what I know about them. I also, in my passing through theater, I did things on invitation. I didn't know, like that guy who was talking about animation and how he planned his career each time and he built a career. I just said yes to things.
Right.
So this path led me to singing at the White House and to singing on a soap and writing my songs on that soap, which wasn't planned either. And singing at Gracie Mansion. It was the Carters in the White House, the Senate Ladies Luncheon. And that was an amazing experience I'd love to tell you more about. Singing for in the living room of Koch, Mayor Koch, and then I also was telling Kevin that I was at the same time as I was doing all of this, I was a photo researcher.
Wow.
So there, just like your videos, I was dropping, I'd start a book and I wouldn't know the lingo or anything. And then within 3 days, I could do a book on forensics and did several. And I knew who the wood chipper, blood spatter expert was, and I knew the labs. And so everything just opened up into a world in these books of all kinds. And the things that they're trying to extinguish now. Fantastic 15-volume series on African Americans, on North American Indians, and beautifully written by wonderful Black scholars and telling it like it is. And they were just wonderful books. And you'd go over the same history in different series. So you get to the same thing through the eyes of women in America or women in the West, or religion in America, Anyway,
now,
so that was
where are those located? Where can you
well,
find
this
those
was
today?
they don't have these anymore, photo researchers. Now, this was before Getty. This was archives. We had to know all the archives. Tuskegee, which they were trying to shut down. Gorgeous photos there. These were our friends. These were the people that gave us the materials we need for our books, and they were gorgeous. I only wanted to do beautiful pictures, and they had these places had them. The Amistad archive. I mean, universities all over and on 3 continents. So that was. So that was photo research, and then I went from theater singing and release and folk and crossover, and I've done albums on each. Went into jazz singing, and I lived in Paris then, and then I was teaching English as not teaching but coaching English as a second language.
Oh, wow.
We were considered ambassadors of American culture, and I was sent. You would have conversations with people. You'd meet the executives at the post office and hear about their meetings and how they were competing with America and doing planes for Lockheed. And or how they had adventures in on the Ivory Coast and amazing things. And so then I did make 6 records of my own stuff and 6 records of my father's music as producer. And that's so that's the lay of the land, all these places. And there are the Forrest Gump boxes of chocolate that we can go into. Just like your videos, just drop in.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sure. So let's talk a little bit about your father. You mentioned that he was a composer and he eventually taught at Harvard. Can you give us a little bit of
So he was, and he had lived in New York before that. His time was around. He and Leonard Bernstein. They were all friends in the 40s, and these friendships never ended. But he started out in California. He started out at City College, and he was going to go into biology to please his mother and father, but she also bought him a piano because she knew how gifted he was at a very young age. So he did famously jump out the window of a lab and go run across the field to the music building at City College, and he was mentored there, and then was. Then he was told by Ernst Toch, a major figure in classical music, that he must go to study with Arnold Schoenberg at the University of Los Angeles. Schoenberg had only just emigrated. This was what I was telling Kevin about this, the incredible time in Los Angeles when it was the golden moment because of Europe escaping fascism, escaping Hitler.
Right,
These
right.
giants of intellects and artists and the interest of the students, and they all had their heroes. There was the Stravinsky side and the Arnold Schoenberg side, and they would meet, as my father described it, like gangs, only they were gangs of incredible
Wow.
acuity in music and studies. And
It's
so my
really
father, yeah,
unique. Yeah. It's
yeah.
really unique.
So my father developed there, and then he, let's see what happened. He got some prizes. Oh, he couldn't go to Europe because of the war when he got the Paris prize. So he came to New York. And then he, by 1947, was a major figure, and he was teaching at University of Southern California, which is why I was born in Los Angeles, then Mills College. Stravinsky had told Mills College about him. They were hiring the best in the art, in all the arts. It was a shame that that school couldn't keep on. They closed only recently. Well, they've merged. And then he got that call in '61 to come to Harvard, and so he taught there. But he was still he founded an orchestra with the dean of 4 schools there. They were good friends and colleagues, and so there were 15 years of a union orchestra that he founded with his colleague Michael Schneegel, and then so in that, and then he was still going to Marlborough Music Festival where he was coaching the. He and Rudolf Serkin, major pianist, particularly he had a big reputation for Beethoven, and his son was Peter Serkin, and Peter was at Marlborough. And so we went there for 10 summers, and these are relationships that lasted 60 years of people who played concerts all over the world and came to Marlborough. And that's another lesson too. These were major giants, and they came to Marlborough not to play solo, but to play chamber music. And they came to mentor. And here's another relevant thing. They were octogenarians. They were Pablo Casals at 80 and 90. They were vibrant. You don't just toss people out and decide when you're young and haven't had the benefit of being taught and mentored and going very deep by these huge figures.
Yeah.
This is gone. And so that's what Marlborough was about people. There was, no ego stuff, but the music and going very, very deep. And so my father was bringing them into the 20th century so that they could play modern music with the same authority that they played classical music. And he did it all at Harvard. Those concerts were beautifully programmed in all sorts of things.
That's
so
awesome.
that was my dad. And he had many friends who, when we had parties before concerts and New Year's Eve, you'd find John Kenneth Galbraith there, advisor to President Kennedy, economist. He loved to conduct Auld Lang Syne, and so he conducted it every year. Our preeminent constitutional lawyer, Lawrence Tribe, I met him in my living room. Noam Chomsky in my living room. All of these people, and they were not in the least pretentious. And as another one of your videos talked about, the filmmaker, when you get to the greats, you are not dealing with ridiculous petty ego. You are dealing with people who are so humble because they have so much talent and so little time to put it out there. And they are not there as figureheads at Harvard. They are there to mentor the next generation, and they feel very deeply about it. So Galbraith, they have huge careers at the top tier. Nobel Prize, there were at least 3 or 4 Nobel Prize winners in the. I would ask my brother, okay, so who won the Nobel Prize? What did he win it for? What was the experiment?
Right.
They were all just themselves, and they were there because they were all colleagues and friends, and they all were giving everything to their students. And
That's
the students
amazing.
were there. They were in our house, and they weren't invited to places like that. Yo-Yo Ma said, he was in my father's performance and analysis class, which allowed my father to bring music to Harvard. They wanted just criticism, and they had these wonderful musicians. They would have to go to conservatories or to other places, and Dad created the degree program for composers, so they didn't have to do film music. He never wanted to himself. They could teach, they could keep their freedom with their music, do what they like, and still have an income. You don't make money in classical music necessarily. So yeah, so these that's what it was about, learning what the greats are. They are not, when they win the Nobel Prize, Saul Bellow even thought that it was a little inconvenient because he was such a tremendous observer. I had a long conversation with him. It's like you could hear his mind ticking and observing everything that you did. It was almost I was feeling ashamed of myself, and he's so sweet and laid back. And I'd met him when we were little. We spent the night at his house. He wrote the book on which my father based his opera. But so I do get lost. I'm always thinking about everything at once. But yeah, they are not thinking. So he felt inconvenience because he really wanted to be an observer, and yet they were treating him like a celebrity because he'd won the Nobel Prize. And his speech for the Nobel Committee. I mean, there you see what a Nobel Prize winner is. This guy in the Washington talking about that. And I actually did a book on the Peace Prize too, as a part of my Oxford University Press, which is the one. That it wasn't just that you were a really gifted writer. It was that you understood so many profound things about humanity and about culture. You had to be an extraordinarily deep and powerful and universal artist in your craft. And anyway, he was that.
It must have been an incredible privilege to have been around like a hub of some of the greatest intellectuals and musicians.
Yes. You are never talked to as though you're stupid, because they are curious.
Yeah.
People like that are curious. They want to know how your mind works and how to give you the information, and funny, and very long term. These were years of these friendships. And the kids all had parents like that, and we all went to different schools, but there would always be someone who was friends with the other group of people at another school. The Kennedys were very prevalent, and many people had friendships with the Kennedys, and the Galbraiths, and the kids and the parents knew each other. It was great. It was a great way to learn about that life with no pretension at all.
Do you feel like music is much, much different today?
Well, do you mean classical or pop? Well, yes, I could say about pop.
Well, I guess to both. Yeah, to both.
Some of the music created, and young people have said this too, that there's no tune. Apparently, I don't know how Dylan felt about getting the Nobel Prize, but when people used to ask him what they should do to be a folk singer or to be successful, he would say, go to school and get harmony. People aren't, the harmonies were so beautiful. Even radio music in those eras, the whole Motown thing, the harmonies. So now when I hear things, I can understand. I see rap, if there isn't a lot of music, I see it as a kind of spoken word. It is theater, and it's very deep. And in France, it was really cool. It was and I heard somebody once I didn't know in a store. This was incredible rap. It had history. It wasn't just it was history. It was very deep, and it was rap. But this thing of having no tune and repetitive, and for me, it's not my thing. I love harmony and tune.
Yes.
Yeah. How do you feel?
No, well, yeah, I feel like a lot of that's been lost.
Yes.
You said harmony. Yeah, harmony in particular. Yeah, It's definitely been lost.
I think things become they're becoming more commercialized. So a lot of that
Yes.
richness is going away to create like something you can almost like manufacture in a
Yes.
factory.
Exactly. It's like it's going to pay for their cocaine bills or something. I don't know.
Yeah, right.
That's not nice. But really, it's just, I'm awful. I have to control myself because I'm speaking in public. But um, uh, yeah, one time I was in Mandy's. I used to find nice things in Mandy's that's moved out of the neighborhood. You know, a lot of teenagers and teeny boppers would go there. And I was hearing this song, and I it was loud, and it you know, something about your booty on the dance floor or something,
Yeah.
and a couple, maybe two notes. And I just, like the eccentric that I am, and being more and more entitled to it as I get older, I went right to the counter, and there were these two young girls, and I said, "You have to read, and you have to listen to music and harmony. It will change your brain. It will, you know." And they looked at me, and they were getting a little tired of it. I met some young people who were saying the same thing you're saying, and that I'm saying. It was, you know.
Well, and you know, also it all sounds the same.
Yeah.
You know, you have one rap style, all
Yeah.
sounds the same.
Yes.
One female pop singer, all
Yes.
sounds the same. Like
Yeah.
it used to be very different. Like you had the Beach Boys,
Yes.
Four Freshmen,
Yeah.
you know, who influenced Brian Wilson, and
Yes.
you know, just so many different groups that were so unique in the 60s and 70s.
Yeah.
And then you get, you know, you jump to the 80s and 90s, and it kind of falls off a cliff a bit. And
Yeah.
today, I think it's really far gone at this point,
I want to
which
stop
is sad.
Yeah, I want to say, but why are you listening to that? You've only got two notes. And I was saying, you know, and I do have a separate category for rap as theater, as spoken word. But my father came home once. I always tell this story. He came home from school. The school means Harvard. And he said, you know, my students just gave me a tape. This man, he's a genius. Do you know who this fellow is? Everyone was always a fellow. Do you know this fellow, Jim Hendrick? And if there was an S, he would take it off. If there was no S, he would put it on. And I said, "Dad, that's Jimi Hendrix." And he was just blown away by that playing and the tremendous scope of his imagination and harmony. And
Yeah,
it didn't matter to him what music it was. You know, it was whether, and also with students too. And Schoenberg was like that. No, but people didn't do 12 tone. He wouldn't even let them touch it till he had an extraordinary understanding of classical music and could write an entire fugue and solve all the musical problems that you get into at the blackboard, and voice things, and have four students come up and voice. I mean, he really understood. And
the theory. It sounds like he was a master of music theory. Yeah.
Yes. And so he would only let them, because he thought they would just use it to be, you know, it'd all be about the you know, the technique and not about the music. So, and I almost forgot. Oh yeah. So, but neither of them ever had, you know, little Schoenbergs or little Kirchners. You know, as long as you could understand your own music, solve its own problems, be true, and know where the DNA of your music was, it didn't matter. As one student said, you could, you know, bang on a can if you knew what you were doing,
if you know where it's coming from.
Yeah, and in your own universe, so that you also are it's your voice.
Oh, and it makes me think of, you know, groups like Bill Evans Trio, jazz, that, you know,
Oh, yeah.
Bill Evans played with Miles Davis on one of his biggest records. And I forget the track, but, you know, Bill Evans wrote one of the tracks on Miles Davis' album. And, you know, just stuff like that does not exist anymore.
Yeah.
You know, maybe you could go see like a jazz player who's 90 years old that's still doing it the way they used to, but it's mostly gone.
And that's the whole thing again about the masters teaching. And I got into jazz when I was at Cleopatra's Needle, right near me, and I had been singing folk songs there because I had my guitar and I could do folk songs. And this guitarist came in and he told me about his show, and I came. It was Ron Jackson, wonderful guitarist, and he asked me to sit in with him. I started singing the song I knew, someone to watch over me. Having this playing was so extraordinary. I felt like a swan being lifted because his harmonizations were happening every second. Jazz is almost as much listening as playing, and
Yeah.
the constant. And my father said, he said these people must practice 16 hours a day to, in classical music, it's all about how you prepare a note and how you phrase it. And he said, and they just do this, So,
are you talking more like bebop players, like Thelonious Monk?
Not
kind of
oh,
stuff?
but he did hear Thelonious Monk, and he said this man is a genius.
Yeah,
he did. He just
in
he heard him
terms of
once.
yeah. In terms of composers, he's one of the best.
Yeah. He once said he'd heard a pianist, and I said, who? And he couldn't remember the name. So I went through everyone. Finally, I got to Oscar Peter. He said I almost had a heart. He was so good, I almost had a heart attack. So I went there. I got to Oscar Peterson. Yes, that's the one.
Yeah.
He never knew who anybody was. He just knew what they were doing.
Yeah, I think everything is following that trend of like commoditization, like being able to create it in a factory almost. Like back in the day, quote unquote, we had like home cooked meals that took hours to cook, but now we have fast food, and music is pretty much like fast food music. You can whip it up quick and try to sell it, and like you mentioned, the mastery is gone.
Yes, and that makes it so easy for us to be where we are today because everything counts in the humanities. My father was also in the Academy of Arts and Sciences. I do want to tell you some other things which are kind of relevant too about that, the White House experience.
Yeah.
That was something, but they were very concerned in 1961, the scientists as much as the artists, about where society was going, with everything turning into like the bean counters and mass market, even universities getting bigger and bigger, and who was going to do the admissions, and what were the priorities going to be, and the kind of intelligence that happens when you do music at depth. There's a certain kind of intelligence. These are the things that society needs, and the scientists, as much as the musicians, were passionate about this, about how important the combination of the sciences and the humanities are. And
absolutely.
Yeah.
So I've seen an interesting story. Like they play, like I guess, like classical music and jazz, and compared it to plants where they played like rap and heavy metal, that kind of stuff. And the former, they grew much quicker. So it's like, if music can have an effect on plants, what is it doing to the population?
Exactly. I have this funny thing about Bach. When I play Bach, I start feeling that I have because I'm hearing something so masterful. I'm understanding math and science, and I have this profound understanding of the world. But then when the music is off, it's all gone.
It goes, it goes away.
I'm just an ignorant person.
Where did it all go? Yeah.
I only had it, during that. And of course, I only thought it was just this feeling you get. The harmonies do things to your and there's a lot of study on that.
And what's also interesting, I mean, kind of out of the college setting, outside of that, there were a lot of jazz players who didn't know how to read music. And so, one guy, Buddy Rich, who I'm sure he couldn't read any music. So he had his guy sit in with the group. They'd go through the set, and then Buddy would jump in for the second set and play everything note for note.
Wow.
Incredible.
Yeah.
So it just shows you really don't need to know how to read music.
No.
You need to know how to feel music. And that's what I teach, feel and groove.
Yes, and I couldn't stand reading, and I regret it terribly. I would learn the music as fast as I could on piano and just never see it again. If I needed to remember a note, I'd just play fast and it would come back.
Yeah.
And I should never, ever have given up piano. That my father he didn't want that to happen, because But I, and so then you can't read through things, and you can't. And then when you do harmony, it's harder if you don't read. But once I hear something, and,
Yeah.
But it's very important to do that. I regret that I just took the easy way out on that.
Yeah, but as you mentioned before, harmony is so important, and
Yes.
it's getting lost right now.
Very. Do you know, my father had a student who then went on to teach my father's performance and analysis class. This was the class at Harvard where you performed your analysis, and that's what made Harvard go into. They got much more into the performing, because before that you had to go somewhere else. And you could do this for credit now. He had Yo-Yo Ma in his class and other brilliant musicians, and they were all playing this music and performing it. And I'm about to be lost. What is it that we were just, what were you just saying? Because I had a point about it. Oh, yes. So this class, I mean, you really had to be somebody like my father, and Robert Levin, who took the class over, is someone who really had this profound understanding of music. And has actually been the person to do the unfinished Mozarts and to play the Salzburg Mozart piano.
Wow.
And extraordinary person. So he took over the class. But then at one point, Harvard decided to end harmony. And
Wow.
he was quite upset. He resigned. I think that they have it all back now. And they've also combined with Berkeley School and NEC, which they were doing at my father's time. He would be going over to NEC sometimes and then coming back to Harvard, so people could get courses in both. But I think they've reestablished that, and they've got some wonderful people there who have that profound depth.
That's awesome.
Yeah, one of them I know, and I was actually waiting to see if I could go into his office when I was walking around Harvard, and I stood outside his door and I listened to him coach. He doesn't know I was there. When I see him or talk to him, I'll have to tell him I listened to his coaching session, and he was giving the deep goods, and that also relates to this master's thing where in jazz, I remember going. Ron Jackson was going to be doing he was playing. Oh yeah, and my bass player was playing with Clark Terry, who was at least in his 80s, and he was playing at not at Birdland, or maybe it was I can't remember where it was. But I went to the gig. After the gig, all the young jazz, there were the hardcore previous generation jazz musicians. They had their vodkas and their scotches, and they had lived life fully. And then there were like the young chickens, the guitarist and my bass player was in the band, but the people who came to jam with Clark Terry, to play with the master, and they had their bean sprout sandwiches and health food and this, that, and the other, but they were all there to get that thing that happened between the jazz greats, the mentors, and the young people that you can get it at a place like Berkeley because they're there. If you're in the company of those people, but it's much more structured. These were people who would talk to them about life, and
it's such a unique experience that you got to meet all of these people. I mean, it's really incredible, honestly.
Yeah, and I got to meet these jazz people because I could afford to go to jazz clubs in New York, and so the singers could come. The musicians were at the jam sessions all night long. They would play and play and play, and a singer could come and do one or maybe two songs and then hang out. Sometimes I would do gibberish writing while listening to jazz players, and I got at least one really good song out of that. Just I kept it for years, and then I wrote it in Paris. But there was so much life. This is all, and even in the photo research thing, this was life. You talked to people, you went to archives, you met people. Very, very human theater. And all of it was non-PC. SAG wasn't there checking out the environment when we were I mean, they probably were, but this was life in those days. You went to a chorus call and you were down in this boiler room. I mean, it was so hot. And it was like the movies. It was like the Judy Garland movies, when she's passing out her resumes and you're going to those offices. You meet those people. It's not these third-party gatekeeper online things.
Right.
And then you come up, and then you have those rickety old stairs, and you climb the stairs, and you're going to be under one light bulb, the romantic theater light bulb, and you're going to sing for these people out there in the black. I mean, we did all that. And now everything is in these perfect studios and everything. But I missed the mixture of the grunge and the art.
And to me, oh, sorry, Kevin, to me, because I'm a drummer, I can't stand beat correction. I can't stand quantizing because it takes all the feel out of the player. And then the player just sounds like a drum machine on their own record.
It seems like the atmosphere is missing now. Like everything's digital. It's quote unquote perfect, but the feeling being amongst the people, the imperfections, all that mixes together to create something unique that's not really present when you're in an isolated sterile studio.
Yeah. And and it's the same with singing too, because there are people who have perfect pitch, but they don't have relative pitch.
Right.
I was at a session once and it sounded so very out of tune. When there are chords, you're in an environment of chords. You're going to a chord or leaving a chord. It's like sax players. There's intonation. There are just slight differences as to whether you're in the middle of the pitch or a little above it or a little under it, going up. Not really sloppy sliding, but you're aware of your environment and that the notes take on a different character depending on where you're going. So
yeah, you're amongst a lot of these greats. Can you give us like some of the lessons that they taught you that stuck with you?
Well, that's where I'm not so great, because I didn't spend as much time with them, but I spent a lot of time with my father, and he was always who he was, whether he was, being, doing something that I thought was completely wrong as a father. And, he still would be this great self, and he read constantly. So the life lessons in our house were from literature too, about, talking about literature and these characters. And so I got a lot of that, and what I learned at Marlborough Music Festival, where all the great musicians were, and the octogenarians who, you don't decide that people don't, shouldn't do office until they're, I don't know, you've got to judge things one by one, because there's tremendous wisdom. So there it was in listening to them play, and the way that the violinists play and the way they created notes, and Ella Fitzgerald, when she sang, she obviously listened to horn players totally, but she had a way of being in the middle of a note and then repowering the whole note in the middle with a new accent.
Wow.
When my dad, like a physicist, and she would fall in at just the right point. And
Sarah Vaughan.
Oh, right? Wow. Yeah.
Did you get to meet her?
Oh no, I didn't meet those jazz greats. I met the people at Harvard in like John Kenneth Galbraith, advisor to Kennedy, Noam Chomsky, who was still thinking he died recently. He was up in his 90s somewhere. Wow. I forgot what exact age, and he's quoted all the time now. Lawrence Tribe, in our living room, and Octavio Paz. But I would the writer, poet, essayist, and the thing I learned that I was talking about, maybe I'm not sure if you were here yet, was just about this humility that they have. I'm so glad to have.
And I think that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
humility, humbleness.
Yes.
It's so
And I,
rare to see it, you know?
yes, because they had much greater thing. They had to be humble before the donor of all the talent, and they had to put it
Yeah.
out. They had to work. They had to, and they also had to manage teaching but yeah, but the conversations, I would listen to the conversations, so I don't even remember what they were, but they would all talk at cocktail parties, at dinners, at big parties. So there would be a lot of information all the time that I was collecting by osmosis.
So you were kind of bombarded with facts.
Yeah. And I was about to tell Kevin and I got lost. When I did a book recently on my father. After I did these shows, I did Three Penny Opera on Broadway, understudied with Kevin, understudying with Raul Julia. Kevin understudied McKeith, so we worked together. I did this show called Houdini with Chris Walken long before he was had really hit the mega stardom. Those were wonderful experiences, but yeah, see, I always get lost because I think of one thing and I go into another. But oh yeah, he said. I mean, how in his article in my book, it's 62 writers writing about my father in 69 pieces, and this is over 60 years of collaboration in the arts and sciences. But he said, I mean, how often do you have a professor, who has a when you go to who invites you to his house, and there you
Yeah.
meet Galbraith and you meet Steve Weinberg, the greatest theoretical physicist
Wow.
of that time.
Right.
Yeah, that was cool. But
No, yeah, we were talking about humility,
yeah,
humbleness, how it's so rare now. You used to be able to find it, kind of everywhere
yeah, and
in the
there's so much.
60s, let's say.
Yeah, and I was lucky to. I mean, I I sang in Mayor Koch's Gracie Mansion in the living room, and then he asked me to come back for something in the hall for his birthday, and the White House thing, that was an amazing. That was in the 70s. It was during the Carter administration. Richard, I'd done a play out of our father's house, which we did at the White House and also on WNET. It still exists. And I was the balladeer for that show. And it had Carol Kane in it by the time we did it on WNET and at the White House. So we were playing in the East Room, and Richmond Crinkly had a theater, and he was hired, I guess, by the White House. He was the attaché bringing culture into the East Room. So the Carters weren't even there when we arrived. And first, the hall was so beautiful. It was so we were coming in as people rehearsing in the White House, not.
Yeah.
And I saw that hall, and I just did pirouettes and chaîné turns all the way down the hall to the East Room, and I was allowed to because they weren't there yet.
Yeah.
And then they landed. When they did come back, their plane landed on the. We watched them land in the helicopter. It was such a brilliant scene. It said USA, USA. It was kind of like those films we all saw on Vietnam, but just coming down, and the trees were just like a hurricane swirling. And the security got very tight once they were moving. But she put these flowers, beautiful flowers, in the East Room. And I was telling Kevin that Out of Our Father's House has writings, spoken word, acted, writings by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Mary Mother Jones, Susan B. Anthony. These were people who were just trying to get the vote for women.
Right.
And they were dreaming that one day they could be senators. And there we were in the East Room, and it was the Senate Ladies' Luncheon. And there was Mrs. Mondale, Mrs. Vance, the older one, not the Vice President Vance family, but Cyrus Vance. So when we were doing this show in the East Room, there was a wonderful guitarist who used to play with Geraldine Fitzgerald, and a flutist, Kevin. I can't come up with the names, but I was the first one to have to sing something, but I was at the White House, and I was such a patriot. I mean, a completely liberal, um, hippie,
Yeah.
patriot who loved democracy and loved history.
Yeah.
And so I was, my mind was so blown already, and then there are all the paintings, of these presidents watching you, looking down at you. I just got such a hit of being a part of American history, and I used to always cry when I went to vote. You cannot take it for granted, that one vote. And so I just was so out there I thought my heart was going to burst. And then the flowers, and then these women getting to talk to future, these weren't the senators, they were wives of senators at this particular event. No, there may have been, I actually don't know, the Senate ladies luncheon. I guess there may have been. I would have to research that. But they were talking. I was the future, and these women that I was watching, my friends, play in front of me, were speaking their voices, and so they were all meeting. And I just, how when your brain it's just too much.
Yeah.
So I had to do what an actor does. You think of your first action. You put everything into your first action, and my action was to educate. It was the song, etiquette rules, rules of behavior from Fine Ladies School. So I'm educating these Senate ladies, and I just thought of that, went with that, and could. But it was so. That was amazing. I went down. I was downstairs walking toward the Oval. I wasn't walking purposely toward the Oval Office, but I was just walking around the halls downstairs and looking at the paintings. And I put my hand in my purse to get a piece of gum. And the second I put my hand in my purse, every guard there had his hand on his gun. I was so terrified and impressed and disgusted with myself for being so stupid to not realize what a risk that would be. But I was terribly impressed with that dedication, that they were so fast, and their job was to protect the president. I mean, it just, these are the things that aren't happening right now. And this was so moving to me. It's a huge experience to have done that.
And, life must feel kind of odd to you now, growing up when you did.
Yes. It's very difficult. I have to say that 15 years before it happened, I saw it coming. What I saw was, in everything I was observing, I would always be a Democrat. I would never vote for fascism or authoritarianism. Of course, I knew about Project 25 before it was even talked about, because it came out early in the Times and Analysis, and also in The Guardian, and then it was republished in full by Newsweek and Time. But what I saw was, it was all impressionistic. Everything I do is impressionistic. And empathic.
Okay.
I thought about how other people were going to deal with the signs I was seeing, where corporations were going, how they were always our friends when Microsoft first came out with computers, and then all this advertising came on, and your computer becomes like a skating rink, and everything closed. It becomes a lot about the gatekeepers, and there were just a lot of things, and the humanities not being valued, and people more wanting to be somebody great than understanding what greatness was, and then being inspired in a deeper way.
That's huge. Yeah, the way you just put it.
It's collateral. Yeah,
that's huge.
Being a great artist, there's a collateral celebrity, but you're not going, and for the collateral, you're going for the thing itself. Yeah. So I saw the devolution of language, where people didn't really understand what words. Everything became rhetorical, and the nuanced thinking that I had grown up with, that was so profound. It was, and had been in our society, so that when people saw Woody Allen, I mean, Woody Allen films, they were funny because we were all reading books and we were all part of
Right.
a society, and there were things that were being linked together. Then the context, the context is starting to go, and irony is starting to not exist, and you're not sure if you can say something. Does this person know about this?
Yeah.
I saw a young guy on the street, a younger person, much younger than I, and and that's another thing, younger than I am. I just, I'm still going with younger than I, not younger than me is. So younger than I, screaming into the phone saying, I can't even talk to a manager anymore. I can't, because, and then they're starting to compartmentalize everything. And I worked for a publisher at a time when that was happening. It was like working for a publisher, like a big hot dog stand in the sky. Everything was minced down. You weren't the researcher who walked into the editor's offices and had these fantastic conversations about the book you were working on with them. It wasn't like being in college, your job, and talking to such interesting people. Everything is, there's a moat, and the world is inside that moat, and you're out here having to deal with Microsoft, ransacking your files and telling you can't get into them. They've locked them, and you're thinking, but I mean, if I walked into your office at Microsoft and I said, oh, hi, I've just been organizing your files.
Right.
No, I can't give you the key. You can't have the key to your file cabinet. You're going to have to call online and find out where you get the keys to the cabinet.
Yeah.
But do you like what I did? And, you'd be arrested for vandalism.
Right.
So things are happening in another world, on another plane, which have a real physical reality. And people are... So what I felt was the climate for the acceptance of fascism. It's always been here. It's always been this battle. But the climate for the acceptance was coming on, where people wouldn't really feel the difference. And plus, we're generations away. My generation, everyone was coming from Europe and from all these. It was a very international life. Marlborough, people from everywhere in the world. Harvard, people from everywhere.
Very unique, very unique experience.
Yes, and university towns, and So, and then. Tavis Smiley was the only one who would have actors on and not be talking about, I don't know, their clothes or this, that. They were really, you got to find out who they were as thinking human beings. And the celebrity of the acting wasn't that. And, it's too bad that had a bad, Tavis's show had a bad ending, and Charlie Rose too, for other reasons. But that was a show. Those were shows where you got to find out who what they thought, their philosophy, and
yeah.
Yes, interesting. You mentioned fascism. I think now with this digital age, fascism can be stronger than ever because you can instantly monitor the population and
yes,
see what they're thinking immediately. But I think we just don't. We haven't been on the receiving end of like the older fascist societies when people were punished. Like we haven't experienced that, so we don't really think it's as serious as it really is.
Yes, that's right. And when there were those, when I was growing up, there were all these. Harvard Square was, and Charles Merrill's daughter actually was married to I think it was Michael and Sarah. He was in SDS, Students for Democratic Society. And my father had given an honorary doctorate speech, the graduation speech, and he had talked about how when those kids, the professors were totally in sympathy with the people but not with their ransacking. And my father quoted this very Yu Tang, I think, to warn the kids not to do that, because then they will put more fear in society, which would then cause a backlash into fascism or other things where people have to protect themselves. They're not really thinking, they're frightened. And so, the students have real messages for the faculty, and there was just much more unity than in very hard times.
Yeah, there's a lot of division nowadays, and I feel like technology is only increasing that divide, especially since you can use like AI robots to push different ideologies. Like,
Yes.
so it's just it's really interesting to see where we're headed.
And
What
that
do
was
you
what.
think about, sorry, I don't mean to cut you off. What do you think about AI and the way it's being integrated?
I am not the great person on this because I don't know a lot about it, and I'm very, very wary. And of course, it's going to put a lot of people out of work. I'm hearing that supposedly there's no more voiceover work. But for me, when I hear
Huh.
AI talking, I just turn it off.
Yeah.
I want to have the persona.
Yeah.
And so supposedly, I can't see how people would like that. But if people get kind of dulled down enough, maybe. I don't know, but I think there are a lot of new roots, and there are new people coming along that I am reading some remarkable things from. And it's great when you've been thinking about a lot of stuff and you can't really talk about it because you're not an expert. You don't have the incredible erudite ability to
Right.
draw from everything into society like Adam Gopnik and many of these Substack writers who have left major news and they've got all this equipment. And but I so I can't really speak on it, but um I don't know. And those scientists at the Academy of Arts and Science, they were looking toward all these things in the future, and who is going to program these things
Yeah.
if we're not valuing the humanities, if people are not reading and learning lessons from great authors, if they aren't having these wonderful masters that teach them, uh, and if there isn't a way that students coming from everywhere if they can't just talk to each other and face everything, and you know you can't do anything if you can't talk about it.
Yeah.
It's my feeling.
Right.
And apparently, Vanderbilt University apparently did very well with this whole Palestinian and Israeli thing. They had talks so that people talked to each other, and it didn't get in the news much. But yeah, and I've gone on one of my tangents and forgotten how that started off. You were asking something. Um,
Well, it
well,
looks like we have a question in the chat. It says, "Do you have any tips for an aspiring actor?"
oh, read plays and take class, learn it, learn. I my way, I mean, everybody, my way in was I had a teacher, Irene Moore, who actually, her parents had to get out of Russia. Her father was an ambassador, and her mother was Sonia Moore, who had a Stanislavski school, and so, learn a technique, learn something that's your step ladder, so that you can access your emotions, and you have a way to start to be able to learn and to build a character, and to have objectives, and it gives you so many tools. It gives you the tools of what people do, and actually a lot of it was taken from Eleanor Deuse's diaries, I believe. I can be fact checked if I've gone off somewhere and said something. I always like to know if I've said, but I remember Irene telling us this. It's what she did naturally to prepare for a role. And so whenever you have a technique of some kind, you've got a place to start, you've got an icebreaker. And I don't know how you deal with this modern thing where you don't get to meet people, but I guess people do get agents. Make things. If there isn't something that you're in, make something. Do videos, do a project. Just always be doing what you want to do.
Yeah, that's great
And read out.
advice.
Backstage is a great. If you're in the union, if you get into SAG, the actors access is really important because it's free, but when you do the paid version, you get the breakdown sheets that all the agents had, so you know what the roles are and what's casting, and you can actually, that's a very serious casting site, Actors Access. Backstage is good because it brings in everything, and you do, I think, have you do have contact with people in letters, but it's got a bit of everything. It's not just shows, and the shows you're going to find out about if you're in Actors Equity. You will see a listing of every Broadway show and every regional theater and all the roles. So find out. I would say to not waste time, really do research into monologues, because you're going to have to do research and find things you love and get into a class. And there are online classes and there are classes.
The bottom line here, it sounds like the bottom line is research.
Research, yes. And also be true to yourself and hone your craft and create a world for yourself. Build a world so that when you go out on stage, you are not just doing something there are objectives and actions, but you also create a universe where things are going on and you are not going to do the same thing ever twice, because you're going to be reacting to your new environment that you created with how you colored your environment, how you set up people and images and your inner monologues, your subtexts, and how it keeps changing. So do everything to fill your whole being with all the tools of being an artist. Always do it to be an artist and to have a vision.
Yeah, that's
and a
really
secret.
Really good advice. Yeah, thank you for that.
But yeah, we're at the top of the hour. We'd love to have you back. But before we get out of here, did you want to leave our audience with any closing thoughts, and where can they find you at?
Oh, to find me? Well, I do have a website that I haven't updated, and that's still on Weebly. They won't let me use I'd have to pay so much to use my my domain. So there's one at lisakirchner.weebly.com. There is Verdant World Records, which has the records that I made and that I produced of my father's that were after the 8 records each, the 8 records that I did on Albany Records. I'm on all the usual suspects online, Google, Spotify, YouTube for free. And if you get to a top tracks site, if you put in top tracks and try to bring up those, then you get that column on the right. You can just choose. So that's Facebook. And then a Facebook. I don't check in enough to my artist page on Facebook. I kind of bring everything onto the friends page.
Yeah.
Because there's so many other artists and friends there. But I think and IMDb, there's stuff. IMDb Pro, but you just put in my name. I think, and there's Verdant World Productions, and that's where there are reviews on my book, a book about my father. And I have to put up more CDs that people can stream, more tracks that people can stream. I've got a lot to do on PR stuff and all of this promo.
Interesting.
But yeah, we definitely like to have you back sometime to dive into some of these other subjects.
Yeah, I would love to. It's great talking with you. I already knew that because I watched the videos, so I know it's going to feel very at home.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for checking out our show.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
We really appreciate that.
Yeah, it's delightful.
Thank you.
Absolutely, and we like to thank everybody